Well, welcome to Wessex Partners' latest round of Fireside Conversations with senior women working in finance. This is part of a series of diversity pieces that we've been doing as a firm, really thinking about and spinning out of International Women's Day a couple of weeks ago. And we're very lucky to be joined by Alison Rose, CEO of Natwest Bank.
Hello.
Hi, Alison. Lovely to have you.
Pleasure to be with you.
And I should also say, starting off, we're heading into the bank holiday weekend and starting to wind down today. As CEO of the largest UK bank, how do you take time out? And I hope you are taking time out over the next few days.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I think as usual, hopefully a nice bank holiday weekend with. I certainly hope nothing dramatic happens, and time with family, hanging out with the children and friends. So that's a good way of winding down. But that's my plan for this weekend anyway.
Good to hear, and that sort of takes us on to our conversation. It's been a very interesting period of time over the last few weeks and few months, but particularly the last few weeks in terms of banking markets, financial markets. But also, as we look back, we're 2 years post-COVID now. For you as a leader of a business like NatWest, it must have been a very interesting challenge taking a bank through a period of time like that, thinking about your customers and what's important to them and the challenges that they were facing, but also about your team and managing a large group of people through that period of time.
Yeah, it's definitely been an interesting period. And I think if anything, what the last certainly 3-4 years have shown us is that things are changing rapidly, and the need as a leader to be able to deal with very disruptive events is almost the norm now. In fact, I had my top leadership team together about 3-4 weeks ago, and they asked me what I was hoping for this year, and I said I'm hoping that we have no 1 in 100 year events this year. And a week later we had the SVB situation, and then further disruption. And I think as a leader, the fundamental thing when you're dealing with those really disruptive elements is to recognize it's not business as usual, and to think about how you can control the situation as much as you can, because some things will be outside of your control, and people's priorities change. And I think what's really important is that leaders are very calm, they're very clear. Certainly when we went into the COVID and the global pandemic, none of us at that point knew what was going to happen, but in the space of that was very early on in my tenure as a CEO. In the space of 6 weeks, we had to get, an organization of 65,000 people working from home, which is a big practical technology issue.
It's extraordinary, actually, when you look back at it, the fact that large organizations like yours were all effectively able to work from home.
Yeah, and it's one of it. I think it's a great learning of the capacity of your team and the capacity of people to do extraordinary things, which they can do, which if we'd planned that in a very methodical, clear way, we would probably still be planning it now. So it is amazing how organizations can react. But also, for us, it was putting our customers really clearly at the forefront. So we knew that there would be vulnerable customers. So we put up, dedicated support for NHS helplines, cash to vulnerable customers. We kept our branches open right the way through COVID. But we also knew our colleagues and were facing similar fears and challenges. So we gave people the comfort that no matter what happened, they would get paid. They didn't need to worry about if something happened in their family, they would be supported by the bank, and making sure that you could just deal with the situation. And then, of course, we were very significant in delivering, extraordinary financial support into the economy as a result of the COVID schemes, and being able to deploy that effectively. So it's a combination of, have a great team, be very clear on what you're prioritizing, control what you can control, and calmly, recognize that these situations are not business as usual. But I think it's the job of leaders to calmly navigate through that.
Yes, and as you said, being able to navigate through that and understanding that each person in your team and different businesses have very different needs and are facing very different pressures. which takes us on largely to part of the conversation around diversity. How do you think the changing environment and what we faced and saw in COVID and coming out has affected diversity, women in leadership roles? And I know a subject very close to your heart as well, entrepreneurship in that space.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think firstly, in any disruptive environment, and particularly over the last few years, one of the things you can be certain of is you won't know the answer, because the path is very unclear and very uncertain, and that requires a different maturity of leadership, and a different style of leadership during those periods. We know that the pandemic placed significantly more pressures on women, both in the workplace and particularly female entrepreneurs. Caring responsibilities still largely fall with women, and with, particularly during the pandemic, with schools closed, women were having to manage their career and look after families with their partners and different family environments. And we know with our research into female entrepreneurship that women found running their business during the pandemic significantly more stressful than male entrepreneurs did. It was something like 75% cited it being more stressful for women than in our research with men, who had it around 50%. So, I think these very disruptive environments put different stress on women and men and families as we had to evolve through them. One of the most important things that came out of COVID, I think, was a recognition that you can work in a very, very different way. And I think that has offered more opportunities for a diverse workforce and more flexibility in how you work. And I think that is one of the things I think we really need to hang on to make sure that we don't revert to what was an old way of working and an old way of thinking. It's evolving. But, at the heart of it, a diverse workforce as a business leader for me is one that is going to harness absolutely the best talent you can possibly get, regardless of gender background, whether that is religious, economic, social, and that's fundamentally why diversity and inclusion is so important, because in a highly competitive environment, in creating the right culture, you want the most talented people to thrive and therefore avoid groupthink, which is the killer of creativity and competitiveness. And so diversity and inclusion is a business imperative in a very disruptive environment. Unfortunately, history has said that we tend to go backwards sometimes on some of those advancements of getting more diverse workforces. But I do think the pandemic has shown us very, very different ways of working and evolving our working practices. That can mean we can have a more inclusive and diverse way of working in which talent can thrive. And I think, we're still all learning and it's still evolving, but I think that is a benefit and an opportunity, with the outcome being a more diverse workforce is going to be a more competitive, more, for me as a leader of a bank, more reflective of my customers and the communities I serve, but also means that I'm creating a culture where I will get the best talent, which means our organisation will be the most successful. And I think that's quite an important both business imperative, but also social and cultural imperative as well.
I totally agree. And it's interesting, I think, coming out of COVID, some of the working practices that you've described, it's interesting, we cover both the US and European markets, and we found actually a lot of our clients that we work with in Europe have gone back to something that looks closer to what we had pre-pandemic. But in the US, actually, it seems to be a lot more flexible in terms of working hours, FaceTime time in the office. But I think, as you said, it goes back to creating a more extra working environment. And actually, a lot of fathers that I speak to said, it's great, we can drop our kids off at school, or we can go to a school play or an event without feeling like we should be doing FaceTime in the office. So actually, a lot of those changes in working practices are helping a lot of different people for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we introduced last year a new parental leave policy, which is that any parent, whether it is a birth parent or through surrogacy adoption, can take equal parental leave over 12 months. And that I think is a really sign of recognizing that people's work and life balances are changing and evolving, and you need to be respectful of that. I think it's a very old-fashioned idea to think of work and life. You have to manage the two, and you have to make create an environment where people aren't being forced to choose between their families and their work. You want people who can contribute to both and have the right cultural environment to succeed.
No, I absolutely agree. But taking a step back, actually, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your career, how you found your way into finance, why you moved into financial services in the first place, and a little bit about your track as you've moved up into your role today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I never planned to go into banking. I'm a history graduate, and I think after studying history, I was more interested in what a career could offer me. And banks offer amazing graduate training programs where you can try lots of different things and learn a lot about yourself. But I knew I wanted to work in an environment that was fast paced, that I could travel, that I would work with great people and try different jobs. And so that's sort of how I found my way into banking. And then through a graduate rotation, sort of learned very quickly the things I was good at and the things that I wasn't good at, as well as the things I enjoyed and the things I didn't. And so the bulk of my career in banking has been in client-facing P&L deal-based roles. That sort of, as I did my rotation, that's where I gravitated to and learned more about myself and what I was good at. So early part of my career was through that, and I spent a lot of time in deal-based environments because I like the challenge and the pace and the exciting thing of doing different things. As I became more senior, the roles became more about what they could broaden my skill set rather than the actual job itself. So I think quite a pivotal point in my career, I was asked to go and run a sort of global project in sort of resetting the bank's portfolio, its balance sheet, sort of a global role. And to be honest, my first reaction when they asked me to do that was, why on earth would I do that? I run client businesses. I like doing deals. That's no way. I'm not doing that. And I think I actually said no 3 times until a very sage mentor said to me, no, you really should take this job. But what that job taught me was, I really liked strategy, and I like global roles, and I like scale leadership, and I like problem solving. And it took my career in a different direction. And I did that for 2 or 3 years and then went back to client facing roles on a global level. But it meant that ultimately I then ended up doing the strategy for the new CEO and then becoming a divisional executive and then eventually becoming CEO of the bank. So I would say my career it was never I never had here's a 3, 5, 10-year plan. It was always what's the next most interesting job, what's the next most interesting challenge, what's the next most interesting thing I can learn. And I think certainly as I look at the environment today, that continuing curiosity, investing in skills, the pace of change, I'm now learning about AI learning and machine learning and data science and behavioral science. Those are parts of my job today which you would never have described or imagined 10, 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So I guess in a 30-year career in banking, it's very rarely gone in a straight line, but it's always been about the next most interesting thing. And of course, when I started on my career, it was very much around smart people, team-based environment, interesting work, constantly learning. And I would definitely say my career has lived up to that expectation.
And I guess you have a very unique experience, actually, if you look at senior leaders across banking, and that you have had exposure to each of those areas of banking and understand how the pieces come together. And as you said, a lot has changed and developed over that time, generally in terms of technology disruption, in terms of regulation, in terms of the needs of customers. So I can imagine it's been a very interesting job as you've moved through the food chain at Natwest. But now you're moving into, and you are in a much more senior role, and as a senior individual in a leadership position. How do you see your role vis-a-vis diversity as you think about other women in your organization, but also outside of the business as well?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think for me, I think being a senior woman, it's really important to me that I mentor both internal and external, that I set the culture that's the right culture. I can have a big influence of that in my own organization, but also externally. I get involved in a lot of work around female entrepreneurship, which is aligned to my, business role in my day-to-day job of running a bank that focuses on entrepreneurs, but also then encouraging the rest of the industry, the financial services industry, to support female entrepreneurs. So I think when you're a leader, it's really important to pass on support and encouragement. I think to role model the fact that anybody can do this job. There's nothing, I always think the myth of there's something extraordinary about leaders. There's nothing extraordinary about leaders. There are good leaders and bad leaders, but fundamentally this is a role that's accessible to everyone. So I think hopefully encouraging more women to come into financial services, which is still, I think, underrepresented across different divisions, but also still suffers a little bit from misrepresentation. I can honestly say that the great thing about coming into into financial services, you can have hundreds of different careers and different roles and learn different things, and it's a very team-based, collaborative culture that is created. And so if I can role model that to people, if I can encourage people to do that, but then I think it's also about making sure that you put in place the infrastructure to make sure it happens. Yeah. I don't think, I would say very rarely when I have challenged different areas to become more diverse, it's not that they're trying not to be diverse. It's just, you need to put measures in place more, create the right culture. And also, the whole point about talent management is talent turns up in lots of different ways, and everybody suffers from some form of unconscious bias. And if you're busy, it's easy to lead people who look like you, sound like you, and come up with the same ideas. Whereas actually, as a leader, your job is to encourage different viewpoints and, open challenge and psychological safety and real diversity. So as a female leader and as a leader, I think I have a responsibility to do that for my own firm, but also to hopefully encourage that as much as I can across the industry and into areas where I can help business. So female entrepreneurship being a great example.
And it's frustrating, frankly, that we still have to have this conversation, but we do still have to have this conversation. And as you were remarking earlier, as we were coming out of COVID, there has been a decrease in the number of female entrepreneurs over 36, as you say in the Rose Review. And still a lot of work needs to be done and needs to happen, because it's very obvious when you look around that it isn't a level playing field. And I think this idea that there is a finite amount of success for women is ridiculous. There's a real opportunity to bring other women with you and actually encourage them into these senior leadership roles. And the more women we have in positions like yours, the more it does encourage people to come through the system and look at you and say, as you said, this is absolutely something that I can achieve and do.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important point. I mean, it's a much used phrase, but I think it is really true that if you can't see people like you in roles like that, then you will automatically assume it's not available to you. And I think having, there are now some great female role models, and more female leaders across the banking and financial services sector. You've got, Claire Woodman at Morgan Stanley. You've got Tina Lee at Deutsche. You've got Debbie Crosby, who's running nationwide. You've got amazing women right the way across. Jane Fraser now running Citigroup. On one of the big Wall Street banks. So there are more and more role models, but I think for me, diversity and inclusion is creating the right culture. It's not about a numbers game, and I think we're all trying to solve the same problem of create the right culture that allows people to develop their careers and evolve and recognize that talent can thrive. And so there has to be interventions right the way through organizations. The sort of concept of a glass ceiling is completely outdated. You have to create a culture that people want to join and then want to stay and feel that they're invested in, and can thrive. We set up something when I took over called, we have a talent academy, which instead of a very old traditional, your boss nominates you to go on a talent program, this is self-nominated and opened up really widely across the organization. And it is, as a result, much more diverse, both from an ethnic minority perspective and also a gender perspective. But we're also taking our programs and taking them into schools. So I have an entrepreneurship program that we put all of our successful entrepreneurs through that now is packaged into a program called Dream Bigger, which is in schools teaching girls to think about entrepreneurship as a career. We take all our training programs, we put our bankers through, and that's now a program called Career Sense in schools as well. And we have a digital mobile apprentice program, which is going into socioeconomic areas, which normally wouldn't attract people into banking, and bringing them through into apprentice programs. So intervention and encouragement and role modeling and creating the culture is how you create diversity, truly culturally diverse organizations who are very successful, because then you're getting different perspectives coming into your organization.
No, absolutely. And it's what would you say we should be doing as thinking about our business as a headhunter, as advisor to our clients? Diversity is something we speak to our clients about all the time. It's a really important issue to them, but solving for that issue is very difficult and complicated, and it's something they're very aware of and spend a lot of time thinking about. But what should they be doing in terms of specific policies and thinking through the way in which they attract and retain women?
Yeah, look, I think it's there's no one thing. I think if we all knew that one magical thing, we would have all done it by now. But I think it is it's a multitude of things. I think, firstly, if I think about my own team, they all have diversity and inclusion targets that sit alongside their P&L. So it's not a HR target over here, it's a P&L target. And frankly, if you don't set targets, things don't get done because the world is very busy. So I think leaders have to be really serious about it. Set targets, realistic ones, invest in the pipeline. This is a multi-year journey. If you just try and fix the numbers without fixing the culture, you'll go forward for 2 years and you'll go back for 5. That's so I think be really serious about bringing talent into the organization and really empower your employee-led networks. We have a really broad group of employee-led networks who have a voice in the organization of employees, both internally and attracting people in to really explain what are the issues that people are facing. I think role modeling the right behavior is super important. Yeah. And I also think that there should never be, we never have a short list that does not have a diverse group of candidates on. And if that means you have to think differently, I think that's really important. And one of the things, and I think this is an increasing part of the world that we're in today, it's, there are lots of skills and training that you can develop people for. And, a role profile with a tick list of skills is not the answer, because there's a propensity to go yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Whereas actually the skills around being, ambitious or curious, or the different sort of behavioral natures of what you need for different roles, are a more important way to recruit, and then you can train people. So, and then there's the obvious things such as promotion boards and pay boards and all those different things to put intervention in. And fundamentally, it's how you behave. People will judge an organization by what they say, what they do, how they behave, and that's what they'll be judging when they want to join you. So for me, we have a purpose-led strategy, which is fundamental about the role we play, but in that diversity and inclusion is really serious, and we're very transparent about it.
Yeah, it's a very difficult subject, this idea of the sort of dark arts of quotas, but it is very important to see women in these roles to encourage other women through organisations. Yep. And that's something we do spend a lot of time talking to our clients about as well. I think we're just about to wind up, but I would just like to finish actually by asking what you would advise young women as they're thinking about coming into banking and finance now. What would be your advice for them?
Gosh, I would say absolutely do it. I have the great privilege of doing a job I really love. And, that's an amazing thing to be able to do. But what I would say is fundamentally be yourself. People are brought into organizations because of the unique characteristics of who they are. So don't try and conform to a stereotype. And particularly for young women, absolutely just be yourself. Don't think you need to have the perfect answer. Ask lots of questions, take some risks, try some things. Don't be afraid of failing. That's how we learn. I have had some monumental failures in my career, and it's always been those moments that I've learned the most. Pick a team of people you really, look at the culture. Are these people you actually want to spend time with? I think that's a really, really important part of what we do. And I think in the early part of your career, take lots of risks, try lots of different things, because that's how you will evolve. But and I also think don't try and overthink your career and plan out. I mean, this is contrary to probably what every HR professional will say, but career lines very rarely go in straight lines, and there are those moments of opportunity that come up in front of you, and you just need to grab them. But I'd really encourage you to do that. And then one of the most important things is employee-led networks, getting a great mentor, getting a great sponsor. Those safe spaces where you can test and learn and be part of a broader connection really are very powerful as you help shape your career.
That's great advice. I think great advice for all of us, actually, Alison. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been great having you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for the conversation.